I was in the middle of installing a new mailbox when I got the letter and envelope with that obnoxious HOA logo slapped on the front like a badge of dishonor. I tore it open, already expecting some nonsense about my grass being half an inch too tall or a flower pot being non-regulation color. But no, this time they'd outdone themselves. The letter, signed in swirling blue ink by none other than Tracy Halwell, the HOA president and resident queen of passive aggression, demanded that I pay $200,000 to the HOA for the improvement and maintenance of the main access road. The kicker: that road was mine. Not metaphorically. Legally, I owned it. It was a weird quirk from when I bought the property 10 years ago. The previous owner, some old developer, carved out a private easement for what became the only way in and out of the neighborhood. The HOA had begged for years to take ownership, but I refused. Why would I hand over a perfectly good road to a group of people who once fined a neighbor for drying towels on a railing, so now they were trying to charge me for my own road? I went straight to the next HOA meeting, stomping into the community center with the letter in hand and fire in my gut. Tracy was already seated at the front of the table, her short blonde bob as sharp as her tone. She adjusted her glasses and gave me one of those tight-lipped smiles. "Isaiah, thank you for coming. We were just discussing the road issue." "Yeah," I said, holding up the letter. "This one? The one where you try to bill me $200,000 for a road I legally own." She didn't even flinch. "We've determined that since the road services the entire community, it's only fair that you contribute to its upkeep. It's my road. I maintain it. I even plow it in the winter. You're the ones using it for free." She clasped her hands together like she was talking to a child. "Isaiah, this is about community responsibility. If you refuse to pay, we'll have no choice but to pursue legal avenues." I couldn't believe the nerve. "You want to play legal games," I said, folding the letter and slipping it back into my pocket. "Fine. But you're not gonna like how this ends." I left that meeting with an idea already forming. The next morning, I pulled out the old plat map from my filing cabinet. The road was clearly marked as private property mine. I called my buddy Trevor, who worked construction, and asked him how fast he could build a small booth, something simple but solid. I wasn't waiting around for another bogus HOA stunt. By the end of the week, a fresh white toll booth stood proudly at the start of the road, just before the first row of houses. I installed a camera, a payment box, and a big, bold sign. Private road, $20 per vehicle, HOA vehicles included. I even got a little petty and added a line below that. Exact change only. No refunds. You should have seen Tracy's face when she pulled up in her Lexus and saw it. She slammed on the brakes so hard I thought she'd pop a tire. I was sitting in a lawn chair nearby, sipping lemonade like it was the 4th of July. She rolled down her window and barked, "What is this?" "You wanted to use my road," I said. "Now you pay like everyone else." "This is illegal," she snapped. "Nope," I said, tapping the laminated copy of my property deed I'd posted on the booth. "I own it, and the law says I can charge for access to private property. You want to sue me? Be my guest. But until then, pay up or turn around." She stared at me like I'd grown a second head, and then she peeled off, screeching tires and all. But the best part: the next day I counted over 60 cars that passed through. 60 cars. That's $1,200 on day one. Game on, Tracy. By the third morning, I had traffic cones out, laminated receipts printed, and a retired Marine buddy named Carl manning the booth while I went to work. Carl loved rules, order, and exact change, so he took to the job like a duck to water. He wore a bright orange vest and a hat that said Private Property Enforcement, which he'd apparently made overnight. The cash box was locked, the camera footage uploaded nightly, and I even had a simple spreadsheet tracking every vehicle by time and plate. Not because I wanted to be petty, well, maybe a little, but because I knew Tracy wasn't going to let this go. And when that woman tried to twist reality, I wanted receipts. It didn't take long. That Friday, I came home to find a folded notice taped to my front door. The HOA seal again, this time accompanied by a formal cease and desist order. They accused me of operating a commercial enterprise without approval and interfering with community access. The whole thing read like it had been written by someone who'd skimmed a legal dictionary without understanding a word of it. I walked straight to my laptop, scanned the letter, and fired off an email to my lawyer, Sheila. She was a zoning specialist who'd helped me when I first bought the place. She replied within the hour, confirming what I already suspected. "They're bluffing," she said when I called. "You're not operating a business. You're collecting tolls on private property, completely legal under state law, but keep documenting everything. If they escalate, I'll be ready." And escalate they did. Saturday morning around 8, Carl called me, voice tense. "They're sending their own guy to tear down the booth," he said. "Pickup truck with a trailer just pulled up. Big guy wearing a polo with the HOA logo on it. He's got tools." I was there in 7 minutes. The guy was already halfway through unscrewing one of the side panels when I stepped out of my truck. "You planning to pay for that?" I asked, walking up. He froze. "I was instructed by the board to remove this obstruction." "You're tampering with private property," I said. "That's criminal mischief under state statute. And by the way, you're being recorded." He looked up at the camera on the booth, still whirring gently on its mount. "You can't charge people to access their homes," he said, but his voice had lost its edge. I handed him a printed copy of the deed and the state code that allowed toll collection on private easements. "Take it up with the county clerk," I said. "But if you touch another screw, I'm calling the sheriff." He backed off, muttering something under his breath, and drove away without another word. That night, I installed a second camera, this one hidden in a tree across from the booth. I had a feeling the HOA wasn't done trying to play dirty. Turns out I was right. 2 nights later, at 2 in the morning, I was woken up by a loud metallic crash. I grabbed a flashlight and ran outside, barefoot on the gravel. The booth was still standing, but someone had bashed the payment box with a crowbar. The lock was twisted and cash was scattered across the road. I gathered what I could and went straight to the footage. The hidden camera caught everything. A gray SUV pulled up. A man in a black hoodie stepped out, swung the crowbar twice, and tried to pry the box open. He seemed to panic when the lock didn't break immediately, grabbed a handful of bills, then bolted. The SUV had a temporary plate and I could make out 3 digits clearly. I brought the video to the sheriff's office that morning. Detective Alvarez leaned in as I paused the footage at the plate. "That's enough to run with," he said. "We'll get a warrant for the dealership records, and if this ties back to the HOA, "That's what I'm hoping," I replied. 3 days later, I got the call. The SUV had been purchased by a man named Lucas Gentry, an HOA board member who also happened to be Tracy Halwell's cousin. The dealership confirmed he'd taken possession of the vehicle the same week the toll booth went up. Alvarez didn't waste time. They brought Lucas in for questioning, and he cracked almost immediately. Claimed Tracy had joked about how nice it would be if someone accidentally damaged the booth. Claimed he acted alone, but the police weren't buying it. They subpoenaed HOA meeting records and emails. Turns out, Tracy had sent a message to the board with the subject line, "Dealing with Isaiah's nonsense." In it, she said, "If the booth just happened to disappear, I doubt anyone would miss it." That was enough for a charge of conspiracy to commit property damage. Lucas was charged with vandalism and theft. Tracy got a visit from Alvarez, and her reaction, according to the report, was to slam the door in his face after calling her lawyer. The fallout was immediate. By the following week, 3 HOA board members had resigned. Tracy hadn't been arrested yet, but she'd been formally charged and was waiting on a court date. The HOA tried to distance themselves from the whole thing, issuing a letter to the neighborhood claiming unauthorized actions by individuals, and assuring everyone they were reviewing internal procedures. But it was too late. Word had spread. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact with me started waving. A few even came by to drop off exact change with a wink. Then, out of nowhere, someone left a thank you note in my mailbox. No name, just thank you for standing up to them. We've all wanted to for years. The following Tuesday, I held a small gathering in my yard, nothing fancy, just lemonade, lawn chairs, and some folding tables. I invited everyone who'd ever been fined for dumb reasons. A flagpole that was an inch too tall, a mailbox that wasn't architecturally consistent, a dog bowl left on a porch. 18 people showed up. We compared stories, laughed, and started talking strategy. Sheila even came by to offer advice on how to petition for changes to the HOA bylaws legally, publicly, and with community backing. I wasn't just collecting tolls anymore. I was collecting allies. The neighborhood had changed, not in some dramatic, revolutionary way, but in subtle, telling shifts. People walked slower along the sidewalks now. They lingered longer at the curb when they saw me outside, asking questions they used to whisper behind shut doors. They were curious, hungry, even for someone to lead the charge against the HOA that had ruled over them with petty fines and veiled threats for years. And now that Tracy Halwell was under active investigation, with her cousin Lucas facing misdemeanor charges, the rest of the board was scrambling to cover themselves. But the cracks had already spread. Sheila suggested we go one step further. "You've got momentum," she said as we sat on my back deck. "You've got a dozen residents who have submitted sworn statements about harassment, selective enforcement, and financial mismanagement. That's enough to request a forensic audit." I nodded slowly, weighing the idea. "Would that force them to open the books? If the petition gets enough signatures and you file it through the county's HOA Oversight Committee, yes. And if anything is off, anything at all, it becomes a civil issue. If it's intentional. That's criminal." The next morning, I printed out 25 copies of the petition and started knocking on doors. I didn't have to say much. People signed almost reflexively. By mid-afternoon, I had 42 signatures, more than 2/3 of the neighborhood. That evening, I walked the petition into the county office myself. Within a week, the audit was underway. Meanwhile, I noticed something strange. The HOA's landscaper, who used to show up every Thursday like clockwork, hadn't been seen. Neither had the pool maintenance crew. Then came the whispers that the HOA account was frozen. Tracy's name was still on the checks, and with her under indictment, the bank had flagged the account pending investigation. They couldn't pay vendors. They couldn't issue fines. They couldn't even afford to print their quarterly newsletter. But that wasn't the end. A letter arrived at my house from the county auditor, marked confidential. Inside was a written request for any evidence I could provide of financial inconsistencies. I handed over everything: the spreadsheet I kept from the toll booth, the camera footage, and copies of Carl's handwritten logs. But the most damning piece came from my neighbor, Teresa, who had been the HOA treasurer 2 years earlier. She brought me a flash drive. "It's all in there," she said, eyes darting nervously. "They never changed the password after I left. I downloaded what I could before they locked me out." The files included internal budgets, receipts, and scanned bank statements. Sheila reviewed them and found it almost immediately. "There's a withdrawal here," she said, pointing at the screen. $28,000 labeled legal consultation, but the timestamp is from the same week Tracy was on a cruise. Teresa leaned over. She said it was to retain a law firm for zoning research. Sheila shook her head. "That law firm doesn't exist. We sent it all to the auditor." That was the tipping point. 2 weeks later, the sheriff's department returned to the neighborhood, not for questioning this time, but with a search warrant. 4 deputies entered the HOA office trailer, escorted by 2 county investigators. They emerged hours later carrying boxes of documents, 2 hard drives, and Tracy's personal laptop. The next morning, Tracy was arrested. She was charged with embezzlement, falsifying financial records, and obstruction of a forensic audit. The press got wind of it quickly. Her mugshot was on the local news by noon, alongside a headline that read, HOA president accused of embezzling tens of thousands. That night, the neighborhood felt electric. Some people were stunned. Others were outright giddy. I stood in my front yard, watching groups of neighbors talk openly for the first time in years. And then something happened I never expected. A man I barely knew, Paul, from the very end of the street walked up and offered me his hand. "Wasn't sure about you when you put up that booth," he said. "Thought it was a stunt, but you proved something. We don't have to take it anymore." I shook his hand, and for the first time since moving in, I felt like we were a community. The county appointed a temporary administrator to oversee the HOA's operations while the investigation played out. The toll booth stayed up, but now it was mostly a symbol, a reminder. Sheila filed a formal motion to have the road officially designated as a private easement with restricted HOA access, until a new board was elected. That election came sooner than expected. The county scheduled an emergency vote to replace the entire board. Sheila helped draft a fair election process, and I was nominated without even asking. I didn't want the presidency, though I nominated Teresa instead. She had the records, the backbone, and most importantly, the trust of nearly everyone on the block. She won in a landslide. Carl joined the board too, as sergeant at arms, which he took more seriously than anyone expected. He even wore a badge-shaped pin to the first meeting. When someone joked about it, he deadpanned. Neighborhood security starts with posture. The new board voted to dissolve several outdated restrictions, including the one that banned vegetable gardens in front yards and another that required all garage doors be painted eggshell top. People started planting, painting, and actually enjoying their own property again. We also passed a motion unanimously to formally apologize to residents who had been fined or harassed under the previous administration. A refund fund was set up, and we prioritized compensating those with documented overcharges. The toll booth, I kept it. Not to collect money anymore, but as a monument. I repainted it navy blue and added a brass plaque that read, "In recognition of the power of standing up." Tourists didn't come to see it or anything like that, but kids would ride past on their bikes and point. New neighbors would ask about it, and someone nearby would always tell the story. The best part, life got quieter, the letters stopped, the threats vanished, meetings became productive, not punitive. And the HOA, the same one that once tried to muscle me out of $200,000, was now serving the community instead of controlling it. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the streetlights flickered on, I sat on the porch with Carl and Teresa. She poured iced tea into mason jars while Carl watched a squirrel with the focus of a tactical drone operator. "You think it's over?" Teresa asked. "It's never really over," I said, "but it's ours now." And that makes all the difference. And as if on cue, a car rolled slowly down the road, paused at the booth, and honked twice. Then the driver waved and pulled into a driveway. It wasn't about tolls anymore. It was about knowing that for once, the road and the rules belonged to the people who actually lived here. The dust had barely settled when the whistleblower came forward. His name was Jared. Early 30s. Wore too tight polos and always jogged with earbuds in. I'd seen him around the neighborhood but never thought much of him. Turns out, he'd been the HOA's data entry guy for almost a year, a glorified assistant who handled mailing lists, updated their internal logs, and managed the board's cloud storage. After Tracy's arrest and Lucas's charges, he'd quit quietly and disappeared from the meetings. He showed up at my porch one Sunday afternoon, looking like he hadn't slept all weekend. "I need to talk to someone who actually gives a damn," he said, eyes darting toward the street like he expected to be followed. "You've got time," I nodded and stepped aside. We sat at the patio table in back, the cicadas humming in the background. Jared pulled out a flash drive and set it gently on the table like it was an unstable explosive. "I copied this the day before I quit," he said. "I didn't know the full picture back then, but I knew something wasn't right." The board was hiding stuff, deleting emails, scrubbing entries from the meeting logs. Tracy even made me retype 3 separate reports so they'd match her version of the budget. "What's on it?" I asked. "Everything. Original logs, emails, security footage archives, bank transfer forms. And one folder labeled consulting, which after what you uncovered I'm pretty sure is code for something way worse." Sheila came over that evening. I told Jared I trusted her and he nodded. She brought her laptop, gloves, and a secure USB reader. Within 20 minutes, we were looking at a mountain of documents that hadn't been part of the county's audit. And then we found it. A spreadsheet labeled Alternate Fund Allocation. There were nearly a dozen entries, amounts ranging from $3,000 to almost $50,000 funneled through vague accounts with names like Safe Haven Consulting and Urban Guidance Partners. None of them had tax IDs. Sheila ran a reverse lookup on 2 of the account numbers. "They're offshore," she muttered. "Cayman Islands. No legitimate HOA does this. Ever." Then she found a folder of scanned receipts, photocopies of cash withdrawals made by Tracy and 2 other former board members. The dates lined up with travel itineraries to places like Turks and Caicos, Maui, and a luxury casino in Atlantic City. Expenses labeled as Community Enrichment Research. She looked up at me. "This isn't just embezzlement. This is fraud on a federal level." We took the drive straight to the county district attorney's office the next morning. Jared gave a full statement under oath. Within 48 hours, the case was escalated to the state attorney general's Financial Crimes Division. Subpoenas went out. Bank accounts were frozen. And a quiet neighborhood that once worried about grass height suddenly found itself at the center of a multi-jurisdictional investigation. 3 more former board members were arrested. One of them, a guy named Dennis who used to host barbecues with HOA VIP aprons, tried to flee the state. He was caught at a small airstrip outside of Wichita with over $70,000 in cash and a duffel bag full of burner phones. The news exploded. Local channels camped outside the community gates. Reporters interviewed residents who'd been fined for wind chimes and solar panels, now learning that their money had funded private charter flights and resort stays. One woman, a retired librarian named Ruth, got tearful on camera when she found out her late fees had paid for Tracy's private spa treatments in Aspen. Public sentiment flipped overnight. The county held an emergency forum. Residents filled every seat and lined the walls. Sheila stood beside Teresa, our new HOA president, and presented a proposal to dissolve the HOA entirely and replace it with a voluntary neighborhood council, one with no authority to levy fines, only maintain communal areas and represent the neighborhood in city planning discussions. People clapped before she even finished. A vote was scheduled. 96% voted in favor of dissolution. The HOA was gone. The city took over basic code enforcement, which meant no more arbitrary rules about lawn ornaments or mailbox flags. The neighborhood council elected its first representatives within 2 weeks, and I stayed out of it. I'd done my part. I didn't want power, I just wanted peace. The toll booth. I finally took it down. Carl helped me dismantle it piece by piece. We loaded the panels into his truck and donated them to a local theater group that needed stage props. The booth had served its purpose. It had started a fire, and now the blaze had cleared the rot from the roots. Jared, surprisingly, stayed in town. He got a job with a local nonprofit that helps whistleblowers navigate legal protections. He'd found his calling. Teresa, meanwhile, led the new council with a quiet confidence that made people actually attend meetings without dreading them. As for Tracy and the others, they faced a full trial. The state charged them with wire fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy, and obstruction. The evidence Jared provided, combined with the toll booth logs, the witness testimonies, and the financial audit, left no room for doubt. Tracy's defense tried to argue that she believed the funds were being used strategically, but the jury didn't buy it. She was sentenced to 15 years, with no chance of parole for at least 9. The others got between 5 and 10. Lucas, who had cooperated from the beginning, was given probation and community service. He now picks up trash along the same road he once tried to sabotage. 1 year after it all began, the neighborhood held a block party, not the kind with permits and plastic tables, but a real one. Grills fired up. Kids played with sidewalk chalk. Someone even brought a karaoke machine. I stood with Carl at the edge of the lawn, watching neighbors laugh without looking over their shoulders. "You think they'll remember all this?" Carl asked, sipping from a solo cup. "I hope so," I said. "Not so they stay angry, just so they never let it happen again." He nodded, quiet for a moment. "You ever think about selling the place?" he asked finally. "No," I said. "This is home. And now that we fought for it, I want to see what it becomes." A breeze rolled through, rustling the trees that lined the road, the same road they once tried to take from me. I thought about the booth, the cameras, the late-night crash, and the quiet victory that came not with shouting but with truth, persistence, and a community finally waking up. This wasn't just about a road anymore. It was about ownership in every sense of the word. And now we had it